What's up guys, I'm Sci-Hi, and in today's video we're talking blue artifacts in Historic, hence why I'm rocking a blue hoodie. But this is a deck with a ton of synergy, as well as some Toolbox application with Whir of Invention. But artifacts have no doubt proven to be really powerful in Historic, especially as of late. They're starting to pick up in the metagame for sure, and it's not surprising why, as we'll look at just how powerful this is if you haven't played with them yet. But this deck, what we're really looking to do is primary win conditions are, of course, Nettlecyst is one of the most powerful artifacts in the format right now, even played in Modern, just to kind of show you how powerful it is. But of course, it's three mana, living weapon, so it's an equipment that comes into play with a 0/0 germ auto equipped with the Nettlecyst, and that creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment we control, and it can equip for 2 colorless. So no doubt very powerful artifact, especially when we can equip it to creatures with flying, or also even be able to attach the all-powerful Shadowspear, which we're rocking 2 Shadowspears in this deck, just because it's such a powerful and important equipment in giving a creature +1/+1, plus trample and lifelink, so we can win those damage races by getting a massive Nettlecyst, gain a ton of life. And with trample, we can ensure the damage is going to get through. We don't have to worry about any shenanigans or just bullcrap with people sacrificing, a cat oven. Doesn't matter. The trample damage is going to go through. But even beyond just the trample damage, we have a lot of flyers in this deck that we can punch the damage through that way as well. So we don't have to really deal with any combat tricks. We can definitely gain a lot of life with this. So primary win conditions, definitely Nettlecyst, but I mentioned a Toolbox application. So in this mono blue artifact list, we're also rocking 3 Whir of Inventions, which, if you're not familiar with this card, maybe you're familiar with Court of Calling, but I guess if you're not familiar with Court of Calling, you're probably not familiar with this either. But anyways, we can just read the card instead of blathering on. But 3 blue and X, and it's an instant. It's got Improvise, which means we can use our artifacts to help cast this spell. Each artifact we tap pays for 1, and we can search for any artifact in our deck with mana value X or less and put it on the battlefield and then shuffle. So basically, just putting any artifact in our deck into play directly at instant speed. Now that's very powerful for sure. We can throw a Nettlecyst into play at instant speed against control. We could do this at their end step to make it more difficult and tax them if they want to try to counter us and play a resource beneficial game on their end. It's just more difficult to deal with putting threats at your opponent's end step into play. But beyond just throwing Nettlecyst into play at instant speed, the ability to be able to find anything when we need it is powerful for sure. And as we'll look at the rest of the deck, we've got a lot of bangers here, as well as some 1-ofs or 2-ofs and just things that we can get on demand when we need them. Also, with Whir of Invention, it's a really interesting card that, cards like this kind of, in a way, they can, over time, get kind of even better, depending on what kind of power creep happens if they ever... Of course, that's not true if they print something that's just strictly better than this. But what I mean is, of course, when you can search for any artifact and put it into play, that means now we could use a lot of 1-ofs in our sideboard, things that maybe are just not very great, generally speaking, but just awesome silver bullets in certain matchups. And being able to use Whir of Invention and just find these things easily when we need them is extremely powerful. But this deck specifically is a little bit configured for best of 1, but absolutely could be adapted with a sideboard for best of 3 and still be very powerful there as well. But Whir of Invention has really been overperforming for me. Nobody seems to be expecting it, which is I'm surprised, because this card has even seen play in Modern, which is no doubt at this point way more powerful format than Historic. So if it can be played in Modern, I think it can be played here. And it really just shines, obviously, in a mono blue list, especially being that it costs 3 blue. There's certainly a very good Azorius artifact list as well. But I really like this mono blue list, just how streamlined it is. I mentioned it's a little bit tuned for kind of best of 1. So before we dive into the rest of the cards, I'll just say, some notably absent cards. You won't see any counterspell type effects, at least in the main deck. I'm really trying to not necessarily like try to be prepared for every possible threat, but in best of one, but be good enough and be able to adapt our game plan that we can have really good game against the majority of the decks in the format, so that we can absolutely pilot this thing to Mythic and have success there. So without further ado, let's take a look at the rest of the deck and see what makes it tick. We can start at the bottom. We've got 2 Mox Ambers as well. Very powerful artifact. You'll notice there's a lot of very cheap 0 casting cost artifacts in this deck to have some really explosive starts. And this is also due to some of the other cards that have synergy that allow us to kind of play off the top of our library, as we'll take a look. But you no doubt can already kind of see where we're going if you've looked at the list or are already familiar with this. But we got 2 Mox Amber. Really good synergy with Emry, Lurker of the Loch. 0 casting cost artifacts quickly synergize in being able to help cast Emry faster. Emry, of course, is just a bomb. 1/2 for 3, but it costs 1 less for every artifact we have in play. You mill 4 cards, and every turn you can tap it to choose an artifact card in your graveyard and cast it. So this is really good to just keep recurring certain utility artifacts that we need that maybe have sacrifice abilities. So even in a vacuum, if our opponent's not cooperating or like has necessary targets, we can still just start recycling cards and get value off this thing right away. As well as the milling ability helps just uncover more of our deck to find what we need and access it that way. So between Emry and Whir of Invention, there's just a lot of resources and ways to find exactly what you need and dump it into play. We also have a lot of just straight up card draw in this deck, as well as ways to play off the top of our library with Reality Chip, which we can look at now. Reality Chip really kind of took me by surprise, if I'm completely honest. When I initially read the Kamigawa spoilers, I stupidly kind of just glossed over this card and didn't realize just how powerful it is. But if you haven't played with this yet, I highly recommend it. It is one of the funnest cards I've ever played with, and it is absolutely just so powerful. Let's read what it is if you're not already familiar. But it is a 0/4 legendary artifact equipment creature for 1 blue, 1 colorless. So it already has, of course, it's an artifact, synergizes it that way, but it's also legendary. So it helps activate our Mox Amber to be able to power that out and actually have it be usable to add a blue mana and actually function as like a true Mox. I mean, how powerful is it in a historic format to actually run a pseudo like Power 9 card in a Mox Amber? Obviously, it's not Power 9, but you know what I'm trying to say. So having legendary creatures is important if you're going to play Mox Amber. And we, of course, have the Emrys, the Reality Chips, and the Size, which we can cover later as well. But let's just hover over a Reality Chip for a moment. So, like I said, this card really kind of took me by surprise. It wasn't clear to me how good this really would be. But what it is, it's 0/4 legendary, and as long as it's attached to a creature, you can play lands and cast spells from the top of your library, which is pretty remarkable. There's a lot of effects actually in this game at this point, and in Historic, that allow you to cast things off the top of your library, but not a lot of things that just let you completely play everything. So traditionally, like when you run these kind of effects where you're trying to play stuff off the top of your library, a lot of times you get jammed when you hit a land where they only allow you to cast spells. But the important thing here is that the keyword says play. So whenever anything says play, of course, it means that you can also play lands as well as cast spells. So that means even if we hit a land on the top of our deck, we can still continue playing that and just keep churning through our deck. So this is just pure value. And when I initially kind of read this card, I don't know why I was incorrect, but I was just kind of underwhelmed by it. I was thinking, the reconfigure cost, like, seems like a lot of upfront cost to, you got to cast this and you got to attach it to something before you can even start doing that. But that really isn't that difficult to do. And we've got a lot of creatures that we can just attach this to. And that effect is just so powerful. that you just start to get to, churn through your library and just start casting all these things. And it's notable that, you're getting card advantage this way, but you're not drawing cards per se. So this means like effects that would negate you from drawing cards don't do anything against you. So if your opponent has like a Narset, you're up against Azorius Control. Traditionally, they're denying you from being able to draw extra cards in your turn using Narset. But that doesn't stop this because you're not drawing the cards. You're just playing them off the top of your library. Now, in addition, even when this isn't attached to something, you still get to look at the top of your library at all times. And that intelligence is also noteworthy of just knowing what you're going to draw can help set up what you're going to do for a turn or anticipate what you're going to do on your next turn. So that's definitely notable and something you might not necessarily think about until you actually play this card. And then you remember, oh, cool, I actually can see the things on the top of my library, even when I haven't reconfigured this or attached it to another creature. But so I was really thinking like this would be difficult to get online and actually attach, but like I was saying, it really isn't. And I always thought like everyone would just have a target on the creature's back. As soon as you attach it to something, they kill it. And yeah, that's true to an extent, but oftentimes you'll still get value right away before your opponent can even react. And additionally, that reconfigurability is pretty valuable in that it kind of gives you a little bit of resistance from sweepers. So obviously, you have it attached to some creatures, and your opponent, Wrath of Gods or whatever, kills all your creatures, but at least the reality chip will live on. It'll just fall off the creature. Notably, of course, sweepers that just exile everything are particularly devastating for this deck. Like I always blank on card names, but the 2 white, 1 colorless alchemy sorcery that exiles all artifacts and creatures, and then makes it so they perpetually cost 2 more to cast and come into play tapped. That card is notably devastating for a deck like this. However, in best of 3, or if you find that you run into that a lot in the best of 1 metagame, you certainly could tune this. I definitely would consider adding a few counterspell effects so that at least you have some resistance to cards like that, because that is definitely one card to watch out for. But anyways, so the reality chip, ton of fun, ton of value, and just way better than I expected, and it just synergizes really well in this deck. It's the only 2-drop we have in the deck, and again, it's an artifact. It helps turn on Mox Amber, and it just gets you tremendous value, so it's definitely incredible. Now, we can cover the other notable creatures. We talked about Emry already, which is just a bomb, and we'll look at the other cards that Emry can keep recurring, and it helps for card filtering and finding different cards. But we also have another blue legend, and of course, Psi Master Thopterist. So I mentioned Nettlecyst is kind of the primary win condition. You can think of the secondary win condition as in just swarming the board with 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens that have flying. So with all of these artifacts, every time we cast one, we get a on cast trigger to put Thopters into play. So with Psi in play, he's 1/4, so he's not that easy to kill. Again, he's legendary, so he helps the Mox Amber. And with all these artifacts, once he's in play, especially if you can get a reality chip attached to him, you can really just start to churn through your deck and just start flooding the board with Thopters. And the Thopters are great for attaching Nettlecyst, getting damage in that way, as well as chump blocking. But moreover, just overwhelming your opponent with resources and just getting so much material onto the battlefield. So we got 4 copies of Psi, 4 copies of course, Emry, Psi, and the reality chip. Just kind of like holy trinity here of just blue bomb legendary creatures to really set this deck off. Guess we can move up to the backside as well and just get this out of the way. The Thought Monitor, of course, just another reason why you would want to play artifacts in Historic, especially even this mono blue list. Thought Monitor, another card used in Affinity and Modern, just because it's so powerful. Affinity for artifacts, 2/2 flyer, but of course the main ability we want this for is when it enters the battlefield, ETB effect of drawing 2 cards. So this is the traditional drawing card advantage in the deck. Thought Monitor is just a bomb. You'll find in this deck you're very often casting it for only 1 blue. And so once things really get going, like I said, the deck really kind of just vomits and just explodes artifacts onto the board between all the drawing, whether the fishing things out of your graveyard or getting things off the top of your library. It's hard to attack this deck's type of card advantage. Unlike Auras, where Auras has tremendous card advantage as well. You're just drawing tons of cards, but that can get shut down by certain things, like I said, Narset. But this deck just generates value in so many different ways, from card drawing, fishing out of the graveyard, playing off the top of our deck, swarming the board with Thopter tokens, as well as, again, we've got the Whir of Invention to just find things on demand, which is really powerful and just great to offer you a lot of flexibility in your sideboard to just load it up with one-of artifacts. And cards like this, like I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, is so fun reading new sets that come out, reading spoilers, because you can always take a look at the artifacts and just find these juicy, new, fun one-of artifacts that nobody expects, that you can just have in your sideboard floating around for that perfect matchup or perfect scenario, and you can just find this card on demand. But Whir of Invention also just really good for, you notice there's a lot of legendaries in this deck. Most of the time you're going to be just finding your best card, Nettlecyst, and getting that on the board at instant speed. But we can also find some of these things like the reality chip as well. Obviously we can't search for Emry or Sai because they're some of the only non-artifacts in the deck besides the Whir of Invention itself. But Whir of Invention, I'm surprised. I really haven't seen a lot of people using this in Historic. And for me, it's been really powerful. Just like I was saying earlier as well, not a lot of people are expecting me to play this at combat when they attack, and they just get set up, and a Nettlecyst often just eats whatever they're attacking with because they weren't expecting some massive body to hit the battlefield at instant speed. But anyways, we'll ramble on and cover the rest of the deck. So we talked about the Mox Ambers. Of course, we got 4 Ornithopters as well. Another 0 casting cost, flying 0/2 creature. Evasion's good. Another great target to attach Nettlecyst to, as well as, of course, like I said, having 0 casting cost artifacts is really good here. It's going to lower Emry's casting cost, as well as just more cheap artifacts to keep dumping into play once you've got Reality Chip online to generate more of the Thopters once you just start casting tons of artifacts. Moving along, we got 1 copy of Tormod's Crypt, just more graveyard denial for 0 mana as well. And again, with Whir of Invention, this can come down at instant speed for just 3 blue. As a surprise way when your opponents are not expecting it, to just completely annihilate their graveyard. Maybe they're about to combo off with Dragonstorm or something, and they don't expect instant speed graveyard denial, but this deck is absolutely capable of it with the all-powerful Toolbox enabler Whir of Invention. So we've got 1 copy of Tormod's Crypt floating around in here. Also along the lines, I've still been kind of testing this deck. So I've been kind of also testing Soul Guide Lantern, another graveyard denial artifact again, but this time costing 1. But so you've got the flexibility there where if you maybe don't have 4 mana, you can find Tormod's Crypt at instant speed or Soul Guide Lantern, whichever makes sense for the situation. But Soul Guide Lantern, of course, very good even if your opponent isn't executing a graveyard strategy, because this is one of those kind of recycling engine type artifacts that we can exploit in this deck. So for 1 colorless, it enters the battlefield, we can yoink a card out of the opponent's graveyard. We can sack this to completely exile the graveyard, and then of course 1 colorless and tap, we can sack the Lantern to draw a card, which notably important and a good powerful engine with Emry online. If we can't do anything else, we can just keep recycling this turn after turn just to draw a card over and over again. So we've also got 4 Aether Spellbomb, 1 colorless, 1 blue sack to bounce a creature to opponent's hand, as well as also has the kind of what I call recycle ability to sack and draw a card. So again, even our opponent's not even using creatures, Aether Spellbomb can be used to defend and bounce our creatures. Notably, bouncing a Thought Monitor is pretty sweet, getting to draw an additional 2 more cards. There, as you can see, once you play this deck, there are so many little, I wouldn't say little, they're big time effects and engines that you can get with many different combinations of cards. So we can't control, our opening hand or what we draw, but there's so much synergy between all these cards, between recycling and finding the right things, or just with Whir and Emry and just ripping through everything with Reality Chip, that you will get engines online that are just really sweet. Like I said, even if your opponent has no creatures, and you can still use the spell bombs in kind of more unconventional ways, like protecting your creatures and just this engine of just bouncing Thought Monitor back and forth and drawing more cards, or at the very least, like I said, just recycling, sacking it, getting it back with Emry over and over again to just keep drawing cards. But it's important. Spellbomb is a very important card in this deck because we don't really have much else in the way of conventional creature removal. So blue is still, of course, one of the most powerful, most likely, almost undeniably, the most powerful color in Magic. I think indisputably, most people wouldn't argue that. But anyways, Aether Spellbomb, great for bouncing opposing creatures. Sometimes bouncing is just better than destroying things, especially if you're up against like auras and they've got just like a massive core Spirit Dancer or whatever, just something stupid that they're attacking you down with. And maybe they've got the dog to give it indestructible, and they would otherwise be able to survive, but they can't stop the bouncing effect. That's just going to wreck their game plan and force all of those auras to fall off. Also, in the mirror match, Aether Spellbomb is great against opposing germs or other creatures that get a lot of equipment attached to them. You've just got to time this to the best of your ability to be as detrimental to your opponent as possible. But again, just a great card, even if you're not doing its conventional use of bouncing creatures. There's lots of other ways of using it as an engine in and of itself. So just a great card for sure. Then also we got the new banger Moonsnare Prototype. This card's proven itself, of course, as like just a very cheap, effective kind of mana ramp, mana rock. 1 blue, we have to tap an untapped artifact or creature we control. Remember, that is artifact or creature. It's easy to forget about that when you're just so artifact-minded, but you can even tap a Sai or whatever, tap an Emry. Most likely you don't want to do that, but if you really need the mana, it's easy to activate this and use it. So this can quickly get some really fast starts with this. On turn 1, turn 2, you get different 0 casting cost artifacts, and you can get Sai and other 3 casting cost things out very quickly, as well as even if you don't tap anything, it's still just more material to help you improvise and cast Whir of Invention that much easier. Now, I've talked ad nauseum about Whir of Invention. We're not running the 4 full copies. While it is really powerful, it's kind of a late game just decider of what we need. It's not something we really want to be bogged down with like tons of copies of this in our opening hand. But almost everything else freely comes out in the early game, and Whir of Invention is just kind of that late game, like seal the deal, find whatever you need. So we got 3 copies of it. But Moonsnare Prototype, again, awesome. Tons of synergy in this deck. Makes perfect sense. Also has the channel ability, which again can't be countered in the traditional sense because it's an ability. You're not casting anything. So you channel for 5. You're discarding Moonsnare Prototype, and the owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library. It's pretty sweet to kind of get an ability like this, especially in like best of 1, to where maybe if opponent's running Solemnity 9 Lives combo, we can at least still have a way to like tuck or try to get rid of the Solemnity and fight through something like that. So you'd be surprised just how often this channel ability becomes relevant. But most of the time, of course, we're just using this as another artifact, just another piece of material to get on the battlefield. Moving on, talked about the Shadowspears. It is legendary, but we're running 2 copies just because, like I mentioned earlier, it's just such a powerful effect. We don't really want to lose one. There's a lot of ways our opponents can exile it, where we'll never get it back. But the deck is quite resilient. Even if it's destroyed, Emry can still fetch things out of the graveyard. But Shadowspear is just such a powerful, impactful card that we run the 2 full copies. So we can pretty much wrap up here. I've rambled on long enough. The lands are nothing too crazy. Notably, you'll notice I do not have the colorless artifact lands in here. While I do think they're good and you can power out, treasures, and it is another artifact to increase your Nettlecyst count. You don't get the cast trigger because they're played, they're artifact lands. But moreover, I value having islands more because again, we are running the Whir of Invention. 3 blue is significant, so I'm all islands here. So just 16 islands. Got 1 Otawara Soaring City, just a no cost, basically an island, but also has the channel abilities where we have just yet another way we can bounce an artifact, creature, enchantment pretty easily. The cost will often be reduced because we do have lots of legendary creatures. So Otawara's just a great card. Backbreaking again against like auras, just a bounce, something that they've dedicated a lot of auras to, a lot of resources sunk into one creature. It can be really backbreaking to just bounce a creature like that. So it's pretty sweet when we can just have a land that gives us this ability from time to time at no extra cost, because it doesn't come into play tapped or anything. These Kamigawa legendary lands are really something to behold. They're really powerful, one of the most powerful lands we've had printed in a long time. So definitely take advantage of these in your decks if you're not already. Mentioned the 16 islands. We also got a couple Hall of Storm Giants floating around in here. While there is a tax on this, of course, coming into play tapped if we have more than 2 lands, most of the time it's not very detrimental, and I think these lands are just so powerful that it's worth that little bit of taxing effect. There's a surprisingly amount of games and different game states where you do actually get up to enough mana to activate this sucker and attack for the win, or one-shot planeswalkers. Hall of Storm Giants is just really a powerful card, definitely proven its worth at this point. But that is the deck in a nutshell. Artifacts are just a blast to play. This deck's got tons of synergy. And like I said, with Whir of Invention, there's just a lot of different ways you can take this. And I'm excited to see like what other people have found as like great silver bullet artifacts, because there's just so many to choose from, and you can configure your sideboard, like I was saying, with just a lot of different interesting things. And again, it's just a card that scales up. It gets better with time as more artifacts get printed. It just adds to like the vault of what this thing can do, and it's a scary card for your opponents because they don't know. There's no open deck lists on Magic Arena, so they don't know what the hell you've got lurking around in your deck just to dump into play. So once you cast one of these in a game, if you're not already winning, they might think twice about how they play next, knowing that you've got this potential avenue to, at instant speed, put any artifact into play. So I'm surprised I haven't really seen, maybe I just haven't seen them, but I haven't really seen artifact lists running this yet. Obviously, you're pretty much kind of dedicated mono blue if you are going to try to harness the power of Whir of Invention, but I think it's worth it. It's been really overperforming for me, and it's just a ton of fun. When you're grinding a lot of best of 1 games, it's maybe worth saying, worth noting that it can be a bit of a slog, just a grind, but being able to have a lot of variance in your games, not only from a competitive standpoint in strategy and being able to find silver bullets, but it just adds to the fun, frankly. Being able to just find anything on demand is just a ton of fun. So anyways, I hope you guys like this build. The description below will have a list that you should be able to import if you want to try it out, or at least try this shell and maybe modify to your liking some more. But Let me know what you think of it. I've had a lot of success with it. Been racking up wins and a lot of fun with it. Just a really fun deck with very powerful, focused strategy, as well as kind of the toolbox avenue, which I talked at length about, so I can wrap up and shut up. But hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope you're having good luck on the ladder. Again, I'm Sci-Hi. Definitely like and subscribe if you want to see more deck techs like this for all different formats, as well as mythic gameplay. And take care, guys. Peace.